The first thing is the people. Obviously, this business is about the connections you make and the people you trust. And the most important people that I trust in this industry are at this company.
The new beginning. Other companies are doing things the same way they've always done them. And so having a new opportunity to do things a different way is what really intrigued me.
I'd say from a sales perspective, what I love most is that we have really the best of both worlds. So we're a big multi-billion-dollar international company with great financials, but on the other side, we also feel very much like the small little family-run company.
I like the safety of First American, but they've got a human side to them, you know, a little softer, gentler approach, and I really appreciate that, and they've really given me a great opportunity to go out and try and build something for them.
In Colorado, guess what? We're all local. There's 4 local underwriters, and together the other day we have almost 125 years of local underwriting experience in Colorado. And I tell that to people all the time, and that's really the big difference. We can make local decisions quickly to get that deal to the closing table. That's the big difference.
We're a team, and we support each other and look out for each other, and it really promotes more business for us.
First American is all about a work-life balance, and the leadership is incredible because they truly care about the customers or the associates that work here.
This is our customer service department, and the marketing support services that are just completely robust. Marketing is a challenge for a lot of real estate brokers. It's something they have to do, but it takes a lot of time. It can be expensive, and we have a fulfillment solution that is far and away better than anything else that our competitors have to offer.
The leadership is very down to earth, and they move very quickly. So anytime I've needed something or had to support a customer or had to make a decision that maybe cost the company money or whatever, they're very quick to make a decision on that stuff.
You're working with people who have been in this market, in the Colorado market, for 30 plus years. At one point, First American was underwriting almost 70% of all transactions in Colorado, and some of those very people were working on those files.
I really believe our people are passionate about our company and do it better.
The following is based on a true feeling.
So, what are we thinking? Is this the one?
You're really good at this.
And that's what it feels like when there's a Century 21 agent in the house. Smarter, bolder, faster.
The first thing is the people. Obviously, this business is about the connections you make and the people you trust. And the most important people that I trust in this industry are at this company.
The new beginning. Other companies are doing things the same way they've always done them. And so having a new opportunity to do things a different way is what really intrigued me.
I'd say from a sales perspective, what I love most is that we have really the best of both worlds. So we're a big multi-billion-dollar international company with great financials, but on the other side, we also feel very much like the small little family-run company.
I like the safety of First American, but they've got a human side to them, a little softer, gentler approach, and I really appreciate that, and they've really given me a great opportunity to go out and try and build something for them.
In Colorado, guess what? We're all local. There's 4 local underwriters, and together the other day we have almost 125 years of local underwriting experience in Colorado. And I tell that to people all the time, and that's really the big difference. We can make local decisions quickly to get that deal to the closing table. That's the big difference.
We're a team, and we support each other and look out for each other, and it really promotes more business for us.
First American is all about a work-life balance, and the leadership is incredible because they truly care about the customers or the associates that work here.
This is our customer service department, and the marketing support services that are just completely robust. Marketing is a challenge for a lot of real estate brokers. It's something they have to do, but it takes a lot of time. It can be expensive, and we have a fulfillment solution that is far and away better than anything else that our competitors have to offer.
The leadership is very down to earth, and they move very quickly. So anytime I've needed something or had to support a customer or had to make a decision that maybe cost the company money or whatever, they're very quick to make a decision on that stuff.
You're working with people who have been in this market, in the Colorado market, for 30 plus years. At one point, First American was underwriting almost 70% of all transactions in Colorado, and some of those very people were working on those files.
I really believe our people are passionate about our company and do it better.
Good morning. I'm Julie Woodfin, Professional Development Coordinator, and I wanted to thank you each for joining us today. We are privileged to have Jeff King and Carol Croft from First Bank with us for today's presentation. They will be reviewing the basic rules of IRC Section 1031 and providing a better understanding of the reverse and improvement exchange process. But first, I wanted to pass along a special thank you to Century 21 for sponsoring today's event. And of course, a thank you also goes out to First American Title for sponsoring our webcast program, which is a part of our professional development initiative here at CAR. A representative from First American is with us today to tell you a little bit more about their company.
Good morning. My name is Casey Thornton, Account Executive with First American Title. You may be wondering why I'm smiling so obnoxiously big. Well, it's because I work for First American Title. We were voted nationally in the top 20 happiest places to work, beating out even Mr. Walt Disney. We were also voted in the top 100 places to work in Colorado. Now, why does that matter to you? Because when you walk into a First American office, you will feel something different. Our happiness passes along to you and your clients. We would be thrilled to share a little of our pep with you. Give one of our perky reps a call.
Thank you, Casey, and thank you again to First American for their ongoing support. Now, before we get started with the program, I have just a few brief housekeeping items. We've allocated an hour and a half for today's presentation, with a short break scheduled at around 10 a.m. Should you have any questions along the way, please feel free to send those to us by email to the address there on your screen, profdev@coloradorealtors.com. If we are not able to address all of your questions during the live webcast, we'll be sure to pass those along to the folks at First Bank to provide an answer for you. And finally, a link to today's PowerPoint can be accessed in the area below the video stream you're watching right now. If you have any problems accessing that, again, just send us an email to the address there on your screen, and we'll be happy to help. At this time, I'm happy to introduce you to Jeff King, Senior Vice President with First Bank. Jeff brings over 15 years of commercial and real estate lending experience to the table. He is involved in all facets of 1031 Corporation, with primary responsibility for corporate strategy, business development, and personnel management. With him today is Carol Croft, Senior Exchange Officer. She has been with 1031 Corporation since 1995 and has been instrumental with the company's growth. Carol is responsible for exchange operations, corporate marketing, and educational training for bankers, realtors, attorneys, accountants, and investors. We appreciate Jeff and Carol taking the time to be with us this morning. So without any further delay, I'll turn the program over to them.
Thanks, Julie, and thank you for joining us today for the Everything You Wanted to Know About 1031 Exchanges webinar. Again, my name's Jeff King, and with me today is my colleague Carol Croft. We're with First Bank 1031 Corporation, and we've been providing exchange services for nearly 25 years now. We're able to assist your client with all facets of the 1031 transaction, and that also includes the exchange itself as well as any lending needs that your client has as well. And what we're going to cover today, if you take a look at your course agenda, briefly what an exchange is and a brief history about 1031 exchanges. We'll talk about the capital gains and how that's changed a little bit over the last couple of years. We're going to talk about investor motivations and why somebody would utilize a 1031 exchange. We'll talk about what kind of properties actually qualify for a 1031 exchange and what properties do not qualify for exchanges as well. We're going to talk about Health 4 requirements and then basic rules and types of exchanges. Those types of exchanges include forward exchanges, reverse exchanges, and improvement exchanges, which we're able to assist on all three of those different types. We'll talk about rules of boot and when your client may experience boot, how your primary residence may fit in with an exchange as well. And then lastly, we'll wrap up with what a qualified intermediary is and why you need a qualified intermediary and some important things to think about when selecting a qualified intermediary. So we'll jump right into it now. I'm going to have Carol open us up here and talk about just what an exchange is.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Okay, our first slide is Introduction to 1031 Exchanges. And basically this slide goes over the heart and soul of an exchange. No gain or loss shall be recognized on the exchange of property that's held for productive use in a trade or business or held for investment purposes. If such property is exchanged solely for property of like kind, which is also to be held either for productive use in a trade or business or for investment purposes. So that's really the heart and soul of 1031 exchanges. So what is a 1031 exchange? Well, right now in 2014, a 1031 tax-deferred exchange is one of the most powerful deferral strategies that an investor can use today. It allows a taxpayer to defer paying capital gains tax on the sale and replacement of property that's held for investment purposes. The only rules are that they follow the 180-day rule, that the property is like kind, and that it is held for investment purposes. The 1031 code section also applies to personal property as well as real estate. This code section actually has been on the books since 1921, so it's been with us for 93 years. In 1984, we got the Starker case that actually put in place the 180-day rule and the 45-day rule. And then in 91, they put these rules into a safe harbor regulation. And then in 2000, the IRS gave us safe harbor guidelines on how to do a reverse 1031 exchange. So that's kind of the basic introduction of what an exchange is. One of the reasons a taxpayer wants to do this is because they want to save on their capital gains tax. And in this slide, we talk about what those taxes are. We start out with a 25% depreciation recapture tax. This is the tax that's paid on the property when it's sold based on the years of depreciation and the credit that the taxpayer has been able to take. The second tax that is applied to a taxpayer would either be the 20% tax or the 15% tax. This new 20% high income tax was just put into place last year. And this affects taxpayers who have an income of over $400,000 for an individual or $450,000 for a married couple. We still have the 15% tax bracket, which applies to taxpayers who have income under the $400,000 and under the $450,000 for married couples. We also still have a zero tax rate for any taxpayer that falls below these ranges. We do have a new tax that has been put into place starting last year, and that's the Medicare tax. And that's a 3.8 tax that is charged on taxpayers selling investment property who have gross incomes of $200,000 for an individual or for $250,000 for a married couple. This last bullet item kind of gives you an idea of what range a taxpayer would fall in. A married couple filing a joint return this year with a standard deduction would be in the lower tax bracket of 10 to 15% if their adjusted gross income is exceeding $94,100. So any income that they receive on a sale of an investment property gets added into this. So most of the clients that we're going to be assisting are going to fall probably in the 15 to 20% tax bracket, Jeff.
Can you touch real quick on the high income taxpayers again, the $400,000? That's not necessarily wage income, correct?
Yeah, that takes into consideration all income. So any income they would receive from the sale of their investment property would be added into this to get to that component. So if they sold a large investment property, it could easily push them above that $400,000.
So they'd be very likely to hit into that if they sold a property.
Most likely.
Basically.
And definitely this would be true for partnerships and corporations as well.
Well, let's look at a simple capital gains calculation. This is one thing we want to point out. As Carol had mentioned earlier, a lot of times an individual that's doing an exchange won't consider or doesn't know that they need to consider the depreciation recapture tax as well. So in this example here, we have an investor that's owned a rental condo for 9 years, and she's selling it now. She purchased the property for $100,000, and now, since she's depreciated it, has a cost basis of that $70,000. So in this situation, she's selling this for $160,000. That calculation's obviously pretty simple. On the right side there, you have a net sales price of $160,000 and her purchase price of $100,000. You've got $60,000 of appreciation, taxed at 20%, so that's a $12,000 tax. On the flip side, as I just mentioned, you've got the depreciation recapture as well. When she bought this property for $100,000 9 years ago, she began depreciating that, and now she's taken a total of $30,000 in depreciation, taxed at 30%. That's an additional $9,000 in recapture there, and both of those taxes can be deferred through the 1031 exchange for a total of $21,000 that she'd be deferring here. And again, I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize when they're doing an exchange, is that depreciation capture can be deferred as well.
Yeah, I think that it's often overlooked. We always know that we're paying tax on our appreciation or our profit, but that we also have to go back and pay tax on that depreciation that we've taken over the years.
And along with that, you may have somebody that that is selling a property for the same thing that they bought it for, so in their mind they don't have a gain. However, depending on how long they've held on to that property, again, they may have depreciation recaptured that they could defer even though they don't have a gain on it. So that's one thing we like to run through here. Let's talk about some investor motivations for completing the exchange. Obviously, as we just touched on, defer taxes is the biggest reason here, but some other reasons someone might want to do a 1031 exchange. Current cash returns can be approved without sacrificing equity. So for example, if you're exchanging into another property, those taxes that you would normally pay, that $21,000, can be remain in the transaction and give you greater purchasing power for the next property coming up.
That's a real powerful point, is that they can use that equity and get into one or more properties with that money.
And that's kind of what the second bullet point here is touching on. Greater investment appreciation can be gained without a large tax bill. And obviously you have the power of leverage. If you have a few properties that you're exchanging, hopefully that'll translate to a much larger property or a few properties that they can exchange into.
And hopefully more income.
Yeah. So that's some of the investor motivations for completing an exchange. A couple more that we have here. Investments can be consolidated or diversified. This can be geographic or the type as well. We see a lot of clients that exchange from farmland into an income producing property, residential property, or vice versa. Geographic diversification, obviously if maybe you're relocating and you've got some rental property in one particular area and you want to transfer that property to where you're going to be living now, that's another reason why that might be a good thing to do.
Or even where you might want to land later in life.
Absolutely, there you go. And as we'll talk about a little bit later, maybe convert that into a primary residence. Investment property can be transferred from one location to another. Again, if you have an investment property in Phoenix and you're looking to relocate to Denver, you can move that in. And then finally, management relief. I touched on this briefly, but right now, we sometimes see clients that have multifamily property and maybe many of them, and they want to consolidate that into one to save a little bit of the headache there.
Exactly.
So we see all different reasons for investors completing exchanges.
So let's go over again just to make sure everybody remembers what is like kind when we're talking about 1031 exchanges. We have to replace with like kind property. Well, in real estate, it's very broad. Like kind real property includes real estate for real estate, which is improved or unimproved. So you can go from a commercial building to a farm, or a farm to a commercial building. It can be multiple properties for one, like you indicated, Jeff, if they wanted to sell several rental houses and buy one apartment building, that works. Or vice versa, if they are tired of managing one large property, they can sell it and buy several small properties. The ownership can also include owning something 100% by the taxpayer, or if they want to get into an investment with other investors, they can have a co-ownership in replacement property too. We also assist clients with like-kind personal property exchanges, and in this area, under the tax code, it gets a little more closely regulated. It has to be office equipment for office equipment, vehicles for vehicles, aircraft for aircraft, machinery for machinery, and with livestock, it has to be the same sex. So it has to be heifers for heifers.
So the rules are even more strict on the personal property side.
A lot more strict.
Huh.
So qualifying property includes real and personal property that's held for investment or for use in trade or business, like I indicated earlier. And all real estate investment property qualifies except for real estate that doesn't qualify. And that's exactly how the IRS writes it in their code too. It's very interesting how they put that in paper.
Very clear, huh?
Totally clear. And like we said before, personal property exchanges are more challenging because the requirements are stricter.
Okay, so we've kind of went through property that does qualify. Let's talk about some properties that don't qualify. Number one on the list, and this is something we get questions on almost every day, it seems like, is personal residence. Yeah. Can I exchange an investment property into a personal residence? And the short answer is no, you cannot. A little bit later on, we'll go through some strategies using a 1031 exchange, whereby down the road you can get into and use that as a personal residence, but you cannot exchange directly into a personal residence. Other properties that do not qualify for an exchange: property constructed, purchased, or held for resale. So if your business is in land development and building homes, basically trade and stock or dealer inventory, that would not count as well. Fix and flips, we get this question quite a bit.
We do.
Somebody wants to purchase a property, fix it up, flip it, and they have not held that for long-term investment purposes, so that fix and flips do not qualify as well. There are ways that you can purchase properties, fix them up, hold them for investment purpose, and then sell them later on down the road and
That's
exchange
exactly
that.
Right.
Condominium conversions, converting them into for sale condos would not qualify. Land under development, partnership or LLC memberships, we get this question quite a bit. The partnership can do an exchange, but you cannot exchange an interest in a partnership or an LLC. So that comes up quite a bit.
Right, if you wanted to sell your interest in one partnership and buy an interest in a different partnership, that's not protected under this code section.
And then lastly, corporate securities, so stocks and bonds. If you had a corporate stock that you held and you had a gain on that, you were going to sell that, you would have to pay the capital gains on that. There's no exchange on that as well.
Right.
So let's see here. Moving on to the held for requirement.
So this requirement is really exactly why those properties Jeff just mentioned don't qualify for exchanges. It's because the taxpayer hasn't held any of those properties long enough to be considered investment property. Relinquished and replacement properties must be held for investment or business purposes. So how long should a taxpayer hold these properties? Well, this has been under debate for many years. There was a private letter ruling that told us 2 years was sufficient, and that's exactly all that letter ruling told us. It didn't say 1.5 years was sufficient, 6 months was sufficient. It just told us that the IRS thought if you owned a property for 2 years, that would be sufficient to qualify to do an exchange. We also know that in 1989, Congress tried to propose a 1-year holding requirement, and they had tacked it on to another bill that year. But that entire bill did not go through, so this additional 1-year requirement didn't make it into law. So right now, we're working with a 1-year holding period as a rule of thumb. It's not a regulation, it's just a rule of thumb. And that's because any property like stocks and bonds or any property that you're holding that's a capital investment, if you hold it for 12 months or longer and sell it, whether you're going to do an exchange or not, the tax that you'll pay is at a lower tax rate than ordinary income that you would receive from employment. So this rule of thumb for 1 year holding to get the long-term capital gain treatment is the rule of thumb we use for holding property for investment purposes. So also what the IRS looks at when they're looking at your held for requirement, they're looking at what purpose did you hold this property for. They're going to look to see if you have been filing it on your tax return on your Schedule E, holding it out as investment property. They want to look at it to see if you've been advertising it for sale, 2 months after you've purchased it. They will also look to see if you have an owner-occupied loan on it or if you have an investment loan on it. So basically, in the course of business, you want to keep all your ducks in a row and you want to make sure that all your paper trail reflects that you're holding this property for investment purposes.
And we've seen this come up in some case law as well, I think, right? When on both sides of it, somebody purchased a property with the intent of holding it for long-term investments, but for one reason or another couldn't get it rented, despite what they tried, just didn't work out as they had hoped. And in those cases, based on what they were able to prove their intention was, they were okay on that exchange.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and that's because this is a rule of thumb. It wasn't a regulation that that allows us to have a little bit of leniency here. So if an investor has owned a property for less than a year and has a good paper trail and they want to just move that into something else, most tax preparers will say that's doable. What we will want is that the property they invest in, the new property, that they try to hold that for 12 months just to solidify their position.
Yeah, okay. Let's talk about the basic rules of exchanges here. This is a little bit of a summary on what we've already talked about, but again, the property has to be qualifying, it has to be like kind, and then it has to be held for investment or business use, which we just got done talking about there. Another rule of the exchange that you must take title to the replacement property in the same name that you were selling your property in. So a husband and wife owning a property, selling that relinquished property, and then they're buying their replacement property, they have to take title in that new replacement property as husband and wife.
That's correct.
If you own it in an LLC that the husband and wife are partners in, then you have to take title to that property in that LLC as well. Corporations, partnerships, LLCs, again, if that's the way the property, the relinquished property is held, that's the way that the replacement property has to be purchased in title and the title holding on that as well. There are a couple of minor exceptions, I guess we would call them. If I owned a property individually, I could take title to my replacement property in a single member LLC, as long as it's just me. That would count as a disregarded entity and something that would be allowed for. The property the replacement property must be of equal or greater value to fully defer all your taxes. Again, if you're selling one property, you need to purchase for a greater or equal value, so you're deferring all of those taxes. Now, it's not absolutely required that you do that, but you need to recognize that if you purchase for less than you sold for, there could potentially be a tax on a portion of that gain that you have.
That's right.
You have to follow the IRS prescribed time requirements, and this is probably the most important part of the 1031 exchange process. There's two time frames here, the 45-day identification period and then 180 days to complete the entire exchange.
And that is 1 clock.
That's 1 clock. So the 45 days is included in there.
Yeah.
After that, you have 135 days to complete it.
We people get confused on that.
Yes.
They think they have 45 plus 180.
Yeah. So the 45-day clock starts on the day that they sell their relinquished property, and the 180-day clock ends. They need to have their replacement property purchased by that 180th day. That includes Sundays and holidays, and so if it falls on a Sunday, they need to be closing on Friday, basically, right?
Not just 45 business days.
Right. And we'll talk a little bit more about identification as we go on here. And then the last rule is that the investor can't have access to the funds, and that's where we as a qualified intermediary come into play here. When the investor sells their relinquished property, they cannot take receipt of the proceeds. Otherwise, they don't have an exchange. It would be disallowed. So we have to, as a qualified intermediary, deposit those funds with us, and we do that at a first bank account. Yep. So it's safe and secure there, and it'll be available for their replacement property purchase.
And all of those funds are held in segregated accounts, one account per exchange client.
So let's talk about, I guess, the basic types of exchanges would be my next one here. We have a simultaneous exchange, which is otherwise known as a deed swap. And this is essentially when you have two parties that have equal value properties, and they just want to swap deeds to the property. They really don't need us because there's no cash exchange here.
They're just trading.
So they're just trading properties. But this is the most basic exchange that there is.
And this was the first type in 1921 that the IRS put on the books.
Yeah, you had one individual with a farm, and they wanted to swap it to this side of town. Yeah. And they determined it was the same value, so they just did a deed swap. The IRS said, "Wait, you had a sale there, so you owe taxes," and that's kind of what started this whole 1031 exchange process.
That's exactly what started it.
Yeah. By far, the most common exchange that we see is the delayed or forward exchange, and this is simply when you have an investment property that you're selling, known as your relinquished property, and that you are going to purchase another replacement property.
Right.
You have a third party hold the funds. Our company here, the qualified intermediary. So really, that's what you need us for, to hold those funds, to make sure that those funds are then forwarded to the title company for your replacement property.
That's right.
We also offer reverse exchange services. Reverse exchange, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but basically if your client finds a replacement property identified before they sell their relinquished property, then we can step in with what we call an exchange accommodation title holder arrangement and take title to that property for them until they sell their relinquished property. And then lastly, we have an improvement exchange. We can combine this with a forward exchange or a reverse exchange as well. But this may be necessary when your client finds a property and the value of the property is not necessarily equal to the relinquished property value, and there's some improvement that need to go into it, so they're building that value up so that they have an equal exchange there. So that's a brief overview of them, and we'll go into a little more detail on the forward exchange process here.
So the forward exchange is the most common exchange that everybody's familiar with, and basically what we start out with is when our client gives us a contract to sell their relinquished property. This is what starts their file. We use the information off this contract to prepare our 1031 exchange documents, and that's our contract that the IRS requires is part of the transaction. We also have to take an assignment of that real estate contract so that we're a party to it with the taxpayer. And then from there we notify the other party as well. So once all these documents are in place, we'll start working with the title company and let them know we're involved and give them our closing instructions. So now our client sells the property and we receive the funds and put it into their first bank account, and their clock starts. So now they have 180 days to finish their exchange, and on the 45th day, if they haven't purchased anything, they need to identify and give us a form telling us what they've identified. The IRS gives the taxpayer 3 different rules to identify property, and the taxpayer has to select the one that's best suited for them. The most commonly used rule is the 3 property rule. This allows the taxpayer to list 3 different properties on their letter, It has to be the exact legal address of the property. If the taxpayer wants to identify more than 3 properties, they can try to work with the 200% rule. And usually a taxpayer would use the 200% rule, Jeff, when they were selling a larger property like we talked about earlier and taking that money maybe to invest in several smaller properties. They want to go from 1 to multiple. So in this case, maybe they need to identify more than 3 because they want to end up with 3 or more. So the 200% rule allows the taxpayer to list properties more than 3, but the value of the property they put on this list can be no higher than 2 times their sales price. So if a taxpayer sells for $500,000, they can list $1 million worth of property. So under this rule, we will look at value and that it can't exceed 2 times their gross sales price. The 3 property rule, the value isn't necessary, it's just allowing them to list only 3 properties. And the last rule, the 95% rule, it's a fallback rule, and it comes into play when neither of the other 2 rules will work. In this rule, the taxpayer lists more than 3 properties, but they have to buy 95% of what they've listed. So in essence, they have to buy everything on their list. And we've had people use that rule, not often, but a few times.
Carol, what happens if somebody uses the 3 property rule and for whatever reason they can't close on any of those properties? Can they pick some new properties after a while?
No, once they submit that letter to us, Jeff, it's logged in and they're done. Those are the only choices they're allowed. So this is a critical time in their exchange. That 45-day time frame goes very quickly. And when they give us that letter, they're locked in and they can only purchase what they've put on that list.
So if at all possible, it may be helpful to be under contract on a replacement property when you start this process.
I think that's a great idea, and the IRS doesn't require that. The IRS doesn't require that any property on their list be under contract. But we think if our clients are going to be successful, that they really should be in contract on their number 1 choice.
It seems like that might be the biggest risk is listing property after you've already sold your relinquished property, and for one reason or the other you may not get those closed. So you have to really think about that hard.
Yeah, I think because of the way the market is now, we're finding a lot of investors actually getting a contract on what they want to buy about the same time they sell, so that they sell and purchase in a matter of weeks.
Probably a good idea.
The last part of the forward process is the 180-day rule. And like Jeff said earlier, that is what we call a drop-dead date. It doesn't matter if that falls on a holiday or a Sunday. The taxpayer has to be entitled on whatever they're going to purchase by that date. This other bullet that we talk about ends on tax return filing or sooner. When our client sells towards the end of the previous year, their 180-day date could actually fall after April 15th. And so we try to notify all of our clients and let them know that they should put their tax return on extension if they haven't wrapped up their exchange. Because if they file their tax return before they've purchased their replacement property, the IRS will deem that their exchange is incomplete and they won't get credit for that. So that's something that we're very aware of, and we try to make sure our clients are aware of that too.
So let's look at a diagram here that we've put together here for the forward exchange process. And as you can see in going through this diagram, you have a buyer. The buyer, when the property is sold, you have an exchanger selling a replacement or a relinquished property. The buyer forwards the money and it goes to the qualified intermediary. And it's held in a segregated bank account for the benefit of the exchanger. Once they identify their property and go to closing, then the qualified intermediary then forwards the money over to the seller of that replacement property. And obviously the deeds are changing hands there as well. All this is running concurrently with the timeline on the bottom. You've got the 0 day starting period when the property is being sold. You've got the 45-day identification period, and then the drop dead date 180 days at the bottom. So this entire process needs to take place within that 180 day time frame. That gives you an idea of how the process kind of works there.
And it goes fast.
It goes fast, yes.
So now let's talk about the reverse exchange process. We're doing more and more of these reverse exchanges right now, and I think it's because a taxpayer finds something that they want and they don't think it will stay on the market long enough for them to get their property sold. So under the reverse exchange process, the IRS allows the qualified intermediary to become a title holding entity. And we can actually lock up and purchase a property for our client and hold it while they try to list their exchange property and get it sold. So under this process, it's exactly backwards from a forward exchange. The purchase of a replacement property before the sale of a relinquished property is allowed under Revenue Procedure 2000-37, and it allows the taxpayer to have a title holding entity, which is under our umbrella, Highland Properties, LLC. It allows a separate entity to become the substitute purchaser of this new property. So what we do is we'll get a contract for this replacement property purchase, and now we're going to prepare our title holding agreement instead of an exchange agreement. And this allows us to take title to the property and hold it for our client. We'll also prepare a net lease agreement, which allows our client to actually sublet the property, manage it, pay the taxes, and take care of the property.
So they still have full control of the property.
They do. They act as our tenant, and they can run and manage that property while we're in ownership of it. So once we have all these documents in order, we'll go to the closing and we'll actually take title to the property. We'll be on the warranty deed and we'll sign all of the buyer documents. And now their clock starts, and they have 180 days to sell their relinquished property. They also have a 45-day clock that's running. And in this identification, they're going to identify what they want to sell, not what they're going to buy. So on their 45-day letter, they can list 3 properties that they might want to sell in order to use that money to go into the one we're in title on.
In most cases, this could be pretty easy because they may just have the one property, right?
Right.
So an easy way to take care of that.
Sometimes we have investors that have multiple properties and they want to sell maybe a combination of 2 or 3 of them to buy a larger one in our first example. And if that's the case, they need to list all 3 of them, and any of the combination of those 3 can be sold to go into a larger property. Okay. So that happens sometimes too. Non-safe harbor exchanges. This is basically talking about an exchange that is going to go out beyond 180 days. A regular exchange is not a hard regulation. It's just a safe harbor guideline right now. So if it goes beyond that 180-day period, the benefits of ownership and the burdens of ownership have to really look like they belong to the title holding entity.
So if at all possible, we want to see them get that completed within the 180-day time frame as well on that one.
It's a lot safer if they can get it wrapped up.
Sure. So why would someone want to do a reverse exchange? Carol had touched on a couple of them, but again, it reduces the stress and the risk of the time requirements. If you've sold that relinquished property and you're out there looking for a property, especially in today's market, it could be very stressful trying to get a property that would be suitable for you, as well as get it under contract and actually get it closed.
That's right.
That can be stressful. You find the perfect replacement property, but you haven't sold your relinquished property yet. So that's another example of why you'd want to do a reverse exchange here. Or the sale of your relinquished property unexpectedly falls out. You may be under contract on both properties, waiting for the sale of the relinquished property, and also under contract on the replacement property, which is kind of what we talked about earlier. It'd be good to have that contract on the replacement property, but sometimes we see that sale fall out on the relinquished side, and you still want to move forward with the replacement property that you've identified. This is kind of a good solution for that as well. And then lastly, your investor is buying an investment property, not sure whether, which property they want to sell, as we were talking about, if they have multiple properties here. One thing I like to talk about here, of course, we always get the question, if I find a replacement property, how am I supposed to buy that if I haven't sold my relinquished property yet? And this is where I get to talk a little bit about our reverse loan programs at First Bank. Basically, we can go in, we can do a bridge loan secured by the relinquished property and the replacement property, and get that property under title holding arrangements with us and get that property purchased. And then once the relinquished property sells, then we can pay that down and put the permanent debt on the replacement property for that. So that's a structure that we use quite often. Works very well. But again, that can be a little stressful if they don't have a solution for that up front. That's something we can offer.
Right, and First Bank is able to lend to LLCs, which obviously is what we're going to hold the property in, so that works out really great.
The Highland Properties LLC, as well as sometimes we see that the property that they're purchasing anyway, they want to have it in that LLC, and that can be very difficult to find. So being able to lend to the LLC is a huge plus there. Let's move on to improvement exchanges.
Okay, like Jeff said earlier, the improvement exchange, I call it a hybrid, because it can take place either after somebody has sold their exchange property or before they've sold their exchange property. Basically, the taxpayer needs to put improvements on the property before they take title to it. That's the only way they're going to get credit for that grossed up value. So we have to take title to the property while these improvements are being put on the property, so that we can sell it back to them for the original cost plus the cost of all the improvements. If we don't have money, if they haven't sold their property and we're taking title, then obviously we don't have any money, and we'll need to go to First Bank and try to get a construction loan or an improvement loan to get started on the property. If we do have funds, maybe we don't have enough, maybe we have enough money to actually buy the property, but we still need financing to do the improvements. Again, we can do a construction loan with First Bank to get those funds. So we'll take title in the same way that we discussed in a regular reverse exchange, and we'll hold the property while these improvements are being put on it, and the client has to receive title back on this property by their 180th day if they've already sold their property, and by their 180th day if it's a reverse exchange and they haven't sold their property. So either way, they're under that 180-day time clock.
Okay. How about rules of boot? Number one, what is boot in an exchange?
I know, this is a great slide. I don't know how many times it talks about boot. I think over 20 times the word boot's on here. But boot in an exchange is when the taxpayer receives something other than real estate. So they might receive money and they might receive debt relief. Those are two obvious areas where a taxpayer could receive boot on a 1031 exchange. So another area is a seller carryback note. We haven't seen those for a while, but I think they're coming back again. And that's when a seller needs to finance his buyer. So maybe he's going to actually carry back a down payment on the property. If that's the case, that note that buyer that gives to the seller, that note would be boot to the seller, because it can't be part of the exchange. We can't have paper. We have to have all of the exchange funds come in.
Proceeds.
So a promissory note could be boot, cash that actually is received by the taxpayer is boot, and debt reduction is also boot. We talk about boot paid offsets boot received, and that's usually comes into place, for an example, with the promissory note. If the taxpayer wanted that note to be part of a 1031 exchange, then they would pay cash to the closing for that promissory note. So they'd have boot paid, and then that would offset the note, which is boot received. And now all of the money is in the exchange account. They can go forward. So that is one example of cash boot paid offsets cash boot received. So they would bring funds equivalent to the value of the promissory note to the closing on the sale, and then the accommodator would take all of the money.
And if we identify a situation where we think a particular client may have boot in a transaction, we'll talk to them about that. We'll let them know about that. Do you see that quite a bit?
Yeah, we talk about that a lot. And more often than not, it comes down to either they're trading for property that's not equal or greater in value, and they're trading down, so we'll talk to them, especially if they talk to us up front and say that they're selling for $250,000, but they really only wanted to invest $200,000. So we'll discuss that trade down would be boot to them. On the next slide, we also talk about inadvertent boot, and that happens quite frequently, and that would be on rent prorations, utility escrow, and security deposits when they sell. So we'll always talk to our clients in advance if they're selling a rental property that has tenants in the property. We'll talk to them about bringing money to closing to service these items so that they don't pay tax on these items. The IRS looks at any of these items on this slide to be outside of the closing. They look at rents and utility escrows and security deposits separately from transaction charges, such as real estate commissions or title policies.
Okay.
Loan acquisition costs can also result in boot. So when we're working on a replacement property, we'll work with the lender and make sure that they lend only the amount necessary to purchase the property, because any overfinancing at the time of purchase could be looked at as boot by the IRS and taxable. So we want that loan to be just for what's needed to purchase the property and to supplement the exchange proceeds that we have.
Okay. That's a little bit about boot in an exchange transaction. Let's move on here a little bit and talk about the sale of a personal residence. I mentioned early on that we get a lot of questions about this. Can I use up my personal residence in an exchange, or can I buy my personal residence? If I'm selling my personal residence, can I defer the taxes on that? And again, the simple answer for a 1031 exchange is no, but under IRC 121, Section 121, taxpayers are provided the $500,000 tax-free gain if it's married filing jointly, or $250,000 for single, and then any gains in excess of that you would get no tax relief on. But that's a pretty powerful tax-free strategy right there. The $500,000 and the $250,000. The basic rules there, if you're not familiar with it, is that you must own and live in the residence for 2 years at any time in the last 5 years. And you can do this once in any 2-year period. You can do it over and over again as long as you meet those first couple of requirements. You can continue to sell your primary residence if you've lived there for 2 years and get tax relief on any gain that you may have there. So, and one thing on the very bottom there of that slide is that it doesn't require the taxpayer to be actually residing there when they sell it to qualify for the gain exclusion.
And that's exactly the point that you're going to talk about next, because that bullet, basically, because the IRS does not require that the taxpayer live in his personal residence at the date of sale, this little bullet allows the taxpayer the availability to do both a personal residence sale and a 1031 sale if they want to.
So what we've seen customers do before is they may do a straight exchange. They have an investment property, and they've identified a property that they may want to use as their primary residence at some point. So they can exchange into and purchase a new replacement property, and as long as they meet the requirements of the held for requirement there and use that for investment purposes, on down the road they could then move into that property, utilize it as their personal residence, and then to add on to that, if they sold that property at that time, they could get both 121 treatment and 1031 treatment depending on how long they've owned the property for investment purposes, as well as how long they've lived in the property. Gets a little complicated, but I guess the bottom line is we can certainly assist in providing some, some help in maybe structuring this down the road.
Yeah, if they convert a rental property to personal use, we want them to at least rent it 1 year before they convert it to personal use. And then after that, if they want to move into it and use it as a primary residence, they can. And down the road, when they do sell it, if they're selling it as a personal residence, they will have to recapture and pay tax on the years that they rented it out. So if they own it for 5 years, they rent it 1 year and live in it 4 and sell the property, they might have to pay 1/5 of any profit. They might have to pay tax on 1/5 of the profit for that year that it was a rental. But the rest of it would be protected under their principal residence rules.
So gone are the days that you could move into it and defer
100%.
all of those taxes?
Yeah, gone are those days.
That loophole got closed, huh?
It did in 2009, I think, is when they shut that down.
Okay, let's kind of start to wrap this up a little bit. Let's talk a bit about what a qualified intermediary is. Why do you need a qualified intermediary in the exchange transactions? And really what to look for.
Right, what to look for when you're assisting your clients who might want to do an exchange. So what is a QI, or a qualified intermediary? It's a person other than the taxpayer that is not a disqualified person. And it's interesting what the IRS considers a disqualified person. QI cannot be a person that served the taxpayer in their professional capacity within the last 2 years as a CPA, accountant, an attorney, or a realtor. The IRS says that these people are not disqualified parties.
But their bank's okay.
No, their bank's not okay either. It has to be somebody that has not worked with the client as a professional in any way over the last 2 years. But a QI can work with that same client over and over again. So basically, your barber could be a QI. So if you want to
try to be comfortable with that.
If you wanted to trust somebody like that, that's who you could go to. But one of the requirements that the QI is responsible for is that the QI has to have a written agreement between the taxpayer and themselves that basically limits the taxpayer's rights and benefits to those funds. That's a critical component to being a QI. We have to have that agreement, and we talked about that during the different processes. We have to have that agreement, we have to have assignments, we have to have notices. These are all components that the IRS require of the QI and paperwork that we have to complete. As far as being licensed, the federal government hasn't put down any requirements for licensing, but states now are starting to regulate QIs. Our state has regulations, and most of the West Coast states also have regulations. And primarily what the regulations tell us is that the QI needs to have either be bonded or insured. In Colorado, it has to be for a minimum of $1 million. Mm-hmm. And the requirements are very minimal as far as what we have to do, but they are in place. And I think it's because some QIs have had difficulties over the last few years that those laws have come into place. So anyway, when you're looking for a QI, make sure that they're bonded, make sure that they have been in business for a good period of time, and just see who their parent owner is and make sure that they have bonding in place. I think that those are important. And where they put your client's proceeds, where those proceeds are banked. I think that's important too.
I think probably can't overlook that if you're a realtor referring an exchange somebody for QI services, you want to know that that money's going to be there when the replacement property is ready to be purchased. That's number one importance here.
That's very important.
Make sure we know the safety of that company.
So once you've engaged that QI to help your client, what does that QI do? Well, basically, the QI consults with the taxpayer, with you as the realtor, and with the taxpayer's attorneys or their CPAs if needed. We discuss all kinds of things that might be involved with the transaction. We discuss the different types of ownerships. We discuss any related party issues that might come up. We discuss financing. How are they going to finance the replacement property, or if financing is needed for reverses. Timing. We always go over the 180-day, 45-day dates. Basically, we cover everything we've covered in this class with our taxpayers on a daily basis. And then, like I said earlier, there's a plethora of paperwork that has to be prepared and executed prior to any of the closings, whether it's the sale or the replacement of any of the properties involved. And then lastly, we make sure that that money's protected and is in a bank account and secure for the taxpayer. So these are kind of the things that keep us busy on a daily basis.
Yeah. Well, just a few closing comments as we wrap up our class here. Again, we're a full service company. We can provide the exchange services as well as any lending needs that your client has as well. We'd love to talk to you. We went through this class on a very, very high level. There's probably a lot of questions, and we would love to talk to you more about it. If you take a look at our last slide there, we do have our email, 1031@1031cpas.com. You can give us a call at 303-402-1031 as well. So that wraps up our class. At this time, we're going to take about a 5-minute break here. We're going to collect any questions that you may have. We'll go ahead and review those, and we'll see you here in a few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
The following is based on a true feeling.
So, what are we thinking? Is this the one?
You're really good at this.
And that's what it feels like when there's a Century 21 agent in the house. Smarter, bolder, faster.
The first thing is the people. Obviously, this business is about the connections you make and the people you trust. And the most important people that I trust in this industry are at this company.
The new beginning. Other companies are doing things the same way they've always done them. And so having a new opportunity to do things a different way is what really intrigued me.
I'd say from a sales perspective, what I love most is that we have really the best of both worlds. So we're a big multi-billion-dollar international company with great financials, but on the other side, we also feel very much like the small little family-run company.
I like the safety of First American, but they've got a human side to them, you know, a little softer, gentler approach, and I really appreciate that, and they've really given me a great opportunity to go out and try and build something for them.
In Colorado, guess what? We're all local. There's 4 local underwriters, and together the other day we have almost 125 years of local underwriting experience in Colorado. And I tell that to people all the time, and that's really the big difference. We can make local decisions quickly to get that deal to the closing table. That's the big difference.
We're a team, and we support each other and look out for each other, and it really promotes more business for us.
First American is all about a work-life balance, and the leadership is incredible because they truly care about the customers or the associates that work here.
This is our customer service department, and the marketing support services that are just completely robust. Marketing is a challenge for a lot of real estate brokers. It's something they have to do, but it takes a lot of time. It can be expensive, and we have a fulfillment solution that is far and away better than anything else that our competitors have to offer.
The leadership is very down to earth, and they move very quickly. So anytime I've needed something or had to support a customer or had to make a decision that maybe cost the company money or whatever, They're very quick to make a decision on that stuff.
You're working with people who have been in this market, in the Colorado market, for 30 plus years. At one point, First American was underwriting almost 70% of all transactions in Colorado, and some of those very people were working on those files.
I really believe our people are passionate about our company and do it better.
The first thing is the people. Obviously, this business is about the connections you make and the people you trust. And the most important people that I trust in this industry are at this company.
The new beginning. Other companies are doing things the same way they've always done them. And so having a new opportunity to do things a different way is what really intrigued me.
I'd say from a sales perspective, what I love most is that we have really the best of both worlds. So we're a big multi-billion-dollar international company with great financials, but on the other side, we also feel very much like the small little family-run company.
I like the safety of First American, but they've got a human side to them, you know, a little softer, gentler approach, and I really appreciate that, and they've really given me a great opportunity to go out and try and build something for them.
In Colorado, guess what? We're all local. There's 4 local underwriters, and together the other day we have almost 125 years of local underwriting experience in Colorado. And I tell that to people all the time, and that's really the big difference. We can make local decisions quickly to get that deal to the closing table. That's the big difference.
We're a team, and we support each other and look out for each other, and it really promotes more business for us.
First American is all about a work-life balance, and the leadership is incredible because they truly care about the customers or the associates that work here.
This is our customer service department, and the marketing support services that are just completely robust. Marketing is a challenge for a lot of real estate brokers. It's something they have to do, but it takes a lot of time. It can be expensive, and we have a fulfillment solution that is far and away better than anything else that our competitors have to offer.
The leadership is very down to earth, and they move very quickly. So anytime I've needed something or had to support a customer or had to make a decision that maybe cost the company money or whatever, they're very quick to make a decision on that stuff.
You're working with people who have been in this market, in the Colorado market, for 30 plus years. At one point, First American was underwriting almost 70% of all transactions in Colorado, and some of those very people were working on those files.
I really believe our people are passionate about our company and do it better.
following is based on a true feeling.
So, what are we thinking? Is this the one?
You're really good at this.
And that's what it feels like when there's a Century 21 agent in the house. Smarter, bolder, faster.
Well, thank you and welcome back. We have a few questions that we've received from some of our participants today. So just wanted to go through these questions here, Carol, and see if we can get some of these answered for them. The first question we have from the first participant is, can I build on a property that I already own?
We get that question a lot, and unfortunately, you really can't. The IRS, it's just easier and cleaner if you're going to do an improvement exchange to use those funds and put those improvements on something new.
So I'm assuming what they're referring to is if I already own a property and I sell my relinquished property, can then I use that property that I already own? And
right,
yeah.
I might have 2 acres somewhere, and if I sell my rental house, can I build a different building or some structure on a piece of ground I already own?
Okay.
And unfortunately, we don't suggest that.
This is somewhat related to that, I think, but can I buy my replacement property from a related party?
Yeah, under this area, the IRS has some new guidelines as far as related parties go. The IRS doesn't care if you sell your exchange property to a related party. You can sell your property to a mother, brother, sister. That's fine. But if you sell your exchange property to an unrelated party and you want to buy out your parents or your siblings, that's not allowable. The IRS says that you cannot buy replacement property from a related party. But they do put a caveat on that. And they say, well, you could buy it from them if they went forward with a 1031 exchange. So as long as the money paid forward and your brother or sister took that money and they rolled it into a new property, then the IRS would allow you to do it.
So they want to see that property being exchanged as well.
Yeah, they want that money not to stay with your related party. They want that money to move forward.
Okay.
So in most cases when we get that question, most of the time it's somebody who wants to buy their parents out of something, and most of the time the party they want to buy from, their related party, doesn't want to go forward. So then it doesn't work out.
So it's maybe difficult to do that, but,
yeah.
But it could work out in certain situations. So here's a question. If a husband and wife own an investment property in an LLC, can they then take title to the replacement property in their individual names? And we touched on this a little bit, but why don't you touch on that?
Yeah, in that example that we talked about during the class, Jeff mentioned what if he owned a property by himself and sold it and wanted to buy his replacement property in an LLC. And in that question we said yes, because Jeff would have a single member LLC with him as the only member, and that's disregarded by the IRS. But a husband and wife, those are 2 people, and they each have their own tax identification number. So a husband and wife that own property in an LLC should take replacement property in that same LLC, because they're not considered a disregarded entity. They're not a single member LLC, it's a 2-member LLC. So they need to go forward the same way.
As soon as you have more than one member, it's going to have to remain the same.
That's exactly right. If that LLC has more than one member, you've got to keep going in that LLC.
Okay. Here's another question. If I own stake in a partnership that's selling a property, can I do an exchange with just my percentage of ownership in that?
You could if you have the time to structure it. You'd have to come out of that partnership and have the partnership deed you your percentage of interest in the property. So now the partnership owns 95% and you own 5%, or whatever your percentage is. You have to have someone get you out of the partnership and get you in title on the real estate. So now you own the real estate, not just an interest in the partnership. Once that's done, then you could be added to the sales contract and be shown as an additional seller of the property, so that everybody knows that now the partnership and you as a partner are selling it. And then you could go forward and do an exchange with your piece of it. But all that has to take place prior to the sale.
Any rule of thumb on how far prior?
Well, it's better to do it as far in advance as possible, because you might get caught up in the held for requirement. The IRS could say, did you really hold it by yourself long enough to qualify, or did the partnership own it? That would be the risk of dropping out of a partnership and then selling it on your own, would be the questionability of the held for requirement. Have you held it long enough?
So some long-term planning may be in order there if you're looking at something like that.
That would be the safest way.
Yeah, okay. Let's talk a little bit about the majority. Where do the majority of the problems arise in an exchange transaction?
Well, possibly in documentation. We definitely need to make sure that the contracts we receive are written in the appropriate vesting, so that we can get all the documents correctly done. So once we know that all the documentation is correct, I guess then a problem could lie on the buy side, possibly buying the replacement property, especially when we talk about how it's titled. Sometimes if a property was held in a trust or an LLC, and we've told the taxpayer they have to buy the replacement property that same way, and they go and are under contract to buy the new property, but they need financing, sometimes a lender might come back and say, hey, we can't give you the loan in the trust or the LLC. We're going to need you to buy it in your individual names and then deed it into the trust or the LLC after the fact. And that causes a problem.
So another good reason to use First Bank for the loan on that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is an excellent reason to use First Bank for that, because we really have to have that client buy in the trust or the LLC.
How about in the, you touched on this a little bit, but on the identification, do we see problems in that regard?
Yeah, every now and then we'll have an issue where they've misidentified a property, or they have wanted to add one after the fact. And like I said earlier, that is a regulation, that's a law. So once that identification is in the file, if there's a typo, if there's a property missing, we can't change it. What we have has to stand. And we can't send money to buy a property that's not on the list. They can wait till their exchange expires and we can give them their money back, and then they could buy it. But we're not allowed to send the funds to something that's not on that list.
And at that point, they wouldn't have an exchange. They would be paying capital gains tax.
That's right. We'd probably have to rescind the exchange, and they would just pay tax.
Okay. On the identification itself, talk a little bit about that. Do you have to have, can I list a particular unit, just say unit 6 in this particular project, or do I have to have a legal address? How specific is that?
It has to be very specific. It really has to be, 315 Sherman Street, Unit J, Lakewood, Colorado. It has to be the actual street address and the apartment or unit number that you're buying. It has to be specific. If it's vacant land, it needs to be the legal description, the meets and bounds.
A TBD in this particular project.
Right. They won't go for that. It really has to have a good plat and a good legal description.
Okay. How long should I maintain my 1031 records for tax or audit purposes? It's probably more of a CPA question, but
that's a good question. How long should any of us hold our paperwork,
exactly.
right?
I think I would visit with my CPA on that, and probably, obviously, being part of your tax return, you'd want to hold any of the documentation related to the exchange along with that return. I would suspect there, but again, probably a question for your CPA.
Right. Talk to your CPA, because that 8824 is a part of your 1040 tax package that you file. So I would follow suit with whatever your CPA tells you to do as far as holding on to all of your tax documents.
Okay. This question here, can you talk about some of the best practices for choosing the right qualified intermediary? Maybe some questions that you would ask them. What in particular should they be looking for?
Well, I've been doing this for 19 years, and I think that one of the most important things that you should check out would be exactly who owns the company that you're looking at using. Find out who the parent company is, who are the actual partners or owners of that company. Find out how they're financed. Find out how the exchange proceeds will be held and where. You know, get an exact bank name or, you know, Chase mortgage account. Find out exactly how and where they're going to hold that money, if it's in a segregated account or not. I think the money and who holds it's important, and then who owns the company that's doing the exchange, because if anything comes up, who could you go to for assistance if you needed to? I think those are really important questions. And then after that, I think it's important to find out who actually is going to do your exchange, and just make sure that they've been in the business for a long period of time. They know what they're doing. Yeah, expertise, exactly.
Yeah. So you're a certified exchange specialist. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure.
Is that something that would be important?
I think it's important. I was one of the first in the state of Colorado to receive my CES, and that was in 2003. That was when the testing was first offered. And to become a CES, you have to have worked in the 1031 industry full-time for 3 years prior to testing. And then you take a written test similar to a CPA exam. It's a sequestered test, about 4 hours in length, and you can't leave the room until your test is finished. If you have to leave, you are finished. You have to turn in your forms. But that test is very grueling, and it goes over all kinds of rules. And I think it's important to know that somebody who's actually talking to you or advising you has got that certification.
It's probably similar to those participants today, the realtors with the designations.
Exactly.
I would look for that if I'm going out to buy a home. I would want someone, an expert that has that designation.
Right, because you know they've went through the schooling and training and passed their tests for their certifications. And just like the realtors are required to keep up with continuing education, so are we with our CESs. We have to have yearly education requirements so that we're up to speed every year on anything that changes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Another question here, what typically happens if the replacement property isn't purchased within the 45 and 180 day time frames?
What typically happens?
Yeah. Or what would happen?
Well, I guess what would happen is their exchange would be null and void, and unfortunately they'd have to pay 25% depreciation tax, 15 or 20% capital gains tax, and maybe even 3.8 new Medicare tax. So it could be painful in the tax arena.
Painful. So we get calls occasionally, someone that sold a property and they have their check in hand.
Oh yeah.
What do we do in that situation?
Yeah, that's a sad story too. Yeah, if they have their check in hand, there's really not much we can help them with, because like we said earlier, the qualified intermediary is required by the IRS to have those documents in place. They're what we call G6 required documents. And that's the exchange agreement, the assignment, the notices.
Prior to the sale.
Prior to the sale. So just the fact that the client hasn't really cashed the check doesn't mean it's still doable. That's one of the requirements, but the paperwork is also a critical requirement. So unfortunately, if we haven't been engaged prior to the closing to get that stuff prepared, I think they're out of luck.
Are there any exceptions to the 45 and 180 day rules?
Actually, you know, there is an exception to that, and those are regulations too. The only exception to those time frames is if there's a presidentially declared disaster. And after doing this for 19 years, our flood actually was one of Colorado's biggest presidentially declared disasters. So any of our active files that we had during that flood, they were allowed to have a 120-day extension to their 180th day and 45-day letter if the property that they either sold or were going to purchase, or that property was identified to be purchased, was in any of the flood areas in our state, then they were allowed that extension. It doesn't happen very often, and of course there's been a disaster to have it allowable, so it's not always a good thing. But it is the one and only time that an extension is allowed during a presidentially declared disaster.
So something that's out there.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's all the questions we have today. I do want to again mention that I'm sure there's a lot of questions that we didn't go through here that a lot of you may have, and we'd love to take the opportunity to answer those for you. Please email us. Please call us. We have an exchange manual on our website that you can access as well, and we'd love to help you out. If it's only just to answer some questions, we'd love to do that, or if we can help you and your client with an exchange, we'd love to do that as well. So that's it for us today. Again, let us know if there's any way we can help, and at this time I'll turn it back over to Julie.
A big thank you to Jeff and Carol for spending part of their morning with us, and also to Century 21 for sponsoring today's event, and First American Title for their continued support of our webcast program. Our next webcast will be the Capital Connections Legislative Review on May 28th at 9 a.m. Please visit coloradorealtors.com to register. You can also follow us on Livestream to receive automatic updates regarding our upcoming webcasts. Thank you all for joining us today, and we do hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
The following is based on a true feeling.
So, what are we thinking? Is this the one?
You're really good at this.
And that's what it feels like when there's a Century 21 agent in the house. Smarter, bolder, faster.